In a world where performance is praised louder than perception, the quietest minds are often the most dangerous. You've probably noticed it. How the loudest voices in the room rarely say anything worth remembering. How those who truly see don't need to be seen while others race to prove how much they know. You sit back. Not because you're unsure, but because you already understand more than you're letting on. And that's the paradox of real intelligence. It's rarely loud, never desperate, and always watching if you've ever felt out of sync with the world. Not because you're slow, but because you're seeing 5 moves ahead. This video's for you. If you've learned to value silence over noise, clarity over chaos, and observation over reaction, you're not behind, you're ahead, you're not lost, you're simply tuned to a frequency most people haven't even discovered yet. If that resonates with you, consider subscribing as a quiet commitment to yourself to think deeper, live, wiser, and walk the path most refuse to see one. You stay silent when everyone's talking. Nonsense. There's something unsettling about walking into a room where everyone's talking, yet no one is actually saying anything. You've seen it happen. People arguing over things they barely understand, tossing around opinions as if they were facts, rushing to speak just to avoid the discomfort of silence. And while all of that is going on, you just sit there quiet, not because you don't have anything to say, but because you're already 10 steps ahead. You're listening, watching, piecing together the truth between the lines. That's not shyness, that's discipline. That's what Epictetus meant when he said, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak." You don't feel the need to fill every space with sound because your attention is doing more than their words ever could. You understand that real power doesn't need to be announced. It's felt. You see, in a world where everyone's racing to be heard, silence becomes rare and rare things become valuable. Most people fear silence because it forces them to confront their own thoughts. But for you, silence is home. It's where clarity lives. You don't talk just to be included or to prove something. You speak when there's something worth saying. And when you do, people listen. Not because you're loud, but because your words have weight. You've removed the fluff. You don't speak to impress. You speak to impact. There's a calm in your presence that throws people off, and it should, because you're not reacting to the noise they are. You're not trying to win the room, you're reading it. It's not that you don't have strong opinions, you do. You've just learned that sharing them carelessly often invites chaos, not clarity. You've watched others trip over their own need to be seen, exposing too much too soon to the wrong people. Meanwhile, you stay reserved, not guarded, but intentional. Your silence isn't an absence. It's a strategy. You don't interrupt others to assert dominance. You let them run in circles while you sit still, absorbing what they miss. You've realized that people will tell you everything you need to know if you let them speak. Long enough, the ones who brag the most often have the least to show. The ones who need to prove their intelligence are the most insecure, and the ones who talk too much, they always reveal more than they intend to. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." That's how you live, not because you're trying to be perfect, but because you respect the impact of your words. You don't throw them around like loose change. You spend them like currency, only when necessary, and only where it matters. That's why your presence speaks louder than most people's speeches. It's not about being better, it's about being precise, about knowing the difference between reacting and responding, between noise and meaning. You're not afraid of silence because you've made peace with yourself. You're not battling insecurity every time there's a pause in conversation. That's what sets you apart. Carl Jung said, "The ability to be alone with your thoughts is a sign of inner strength." And while others are scrambling to be heard, to be liked, to be validated, you're just observing, collecting patterns, storing insights, playing the long game. You've realized that the loudest voice rarely holds the most truth. It's often the most fragile. And when you speak, you don't compete. You clarify. You don't raise your voice. You raise the standard of the conversation. That's a kind of intelligence that doesn't need applause to exist. It doesn't ask for attention, it just is. And the truth is, you weren't always like this. Maybe you used to over-explain, maybe you used to talk too much out of nervousness or pressure. But time taught you something that books couldn't silence. Taught you disappointment. Taught you being misunderstood, taught you. And now, you don't mind being the one who doesn't jump in. You know, your presence does more than your words ever could. You've become someone who doesn't just speak, but someone who knows when not to speak. That's a rare gift, and it's one that changes everything. Seneca once warned, "Speech is the mirror of the soul. As a man speaks, so is he." You've taken that to heart. You've stopped broadcasting every thought and started refining them. Instead, you've learned that restraint is strength, that observation is power, and that people reveal their motives faster when they think no one is paying close attention. You're paying attention. You're always paying attention. And in that space between what people say and what they mean, that's where your intelligence lives, quietly, calmly, unapologetically. So when you sit in a room full of noise and you choose silence, understand this. You are not invisible. You are in control. Not everyone will get it. Some will assume you're distant, passive, or disconnected. Let them, because in the stillness of your silence, you're holding something far more powerful than attention awareness, and in a world that confuses volume with value, awareness is the sharpest tool you can carry. Stay patient. Stay observant. Let others spend their energy trying to be seen. You've already seen what matters, and when the time comes when your words do leave your mouth, they'll echo longer than anyone else's noise ever could, too. You read between the lines. Always there's something exhausting about pretending not to see what you actually see, but for most people, that's exactly how they move through the world. Ignoring the gut feelings, brushing off the inconsistencies, and giving others the benefit of the doubt, even when something doesn't sit right. You've learned not to do that, not because you're cynical, but because life taught you that surface-level trust can cost more than it's worth. You've been in situations where people said all the right things and still betrayed you. Smiled to your face, praised your work, spoke gently, but their energy, off their timing, suspicious their eyes, telling you a completely different story. And while others let those signs slide, you can't. Because once you've seen the pattern, you can't unseen it. You don't call it paranoia. You call it clarity. What others call overthinking, you call observation. You're not looking for drama. You're looking for the truth, and the truth is rarely spoken directly most of the time. It slips out in hesitation and avoidance, in contradictions between words and behavior. That's where you listen. Not to what someone says once, but what they repeat, without realizing not to what they tell the crowd, but to how they act when no one's watching. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." You've made it conscious, you're awake to the subtle motives most people try to hide even from themselves. You notice how someone's tone doesn't match their message. You catch the pauses that come a half-second too late. You sense when excitement is forced, when kindness is transactional, when someone is smiling only with their mouth. That ability to read between the lines makes you different. It also makes you a little dangerous because people can't manipulate you like they do with others. Their charm doesn't blind you. Their sob stories don't work you. Can sense when a compliment is bait. You know when someone is mirroring you just to gain your trust while others are flattered? You're calculating, not because you want control, but because you value truth over comfort. Epictetus taught it is impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows, and you've seen that play out in real life. Most people want to believe what makes them feel good, not what makes them see clearly. They choose illusion because it's softer, but that softness comes with a cost. Blind spots. You don't live like that. You've chosen clarity over convenience. That's why you're so hard to lie to. You pick up on stories that don't line up. You notice when someone's behavior shifts after they get what they want. You can tell when someone's pretending to care. It's not even something you try to do. It's just how you process the world now, and no, it's not always fun. Sometimes it's lonely being this aware. You notice manipulation in conversations that others think are harmless. You pick up on hidden resentment in smiles that everyone else calls friendly. You catch the shift in body language that signals jealousy before anyone says a word. It can feel like carrying a radar that's always on, but at the same time, it's a shield. It protects you from being fooled, from giving your energy to people who only want to drain it, from trusting too soon, too easily, too deeply. Seneca once said, "The greatest remedy for anger is delay." And you understand that deeply, because your instinct isn't to react. It's to observe when someone crosses a line. You don't explode. You file it. You analyze it. You study what made them do it, and whether they'll do it again. You let people show you who they really are without rushing to define them. You wait. You watch. And when it becomes clear that their intentions are off, you step back, not dramatically but deliberately. You don't need to expose them publicly. You just stop giving them access. That quiet boundary is something most people never see coming. You also don't romanticize people. You don't fall for potential. You pay attention to patterns. If someone shows you inconsistency, you believe them. If they say all the right things, but live the opposite, you believe their actions. And when you feel that something is off, you trust that instinct, not because you want to assume the worst, but because your life has proven it right. Too many times to ignore. Socrates said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." You've turned that inward and outward. You examine people not to judge, but to understand. And in understanding, you've become unshakable. The truth is, this level of perception isn't something most people are ready for. They want to be seen, but only the version of themselves they carefully curate. They want acceptance, not reflection, but when they're around you, they feel something different. They feel exposed. Not because you're judging them, but because your presence mirrors back what they're trying to hide. And that's not always welcomed. You might be called intense, distant, hard to read, but that's just what it looks like when someone refuses to play the surface-level game. Marcus Aurelius reminded us, never esteem anything as of advantage to you that will make you break your word or lose your self-respect, and that includes pretending not to notice what's right in front of you. You've made a commitment to truth, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it isolates you, even when it hurts, because nothing is more dangerous than self-deception, and nothing is more powerful than seeing clearly. So yes, you read between the lines, not because you're suspicious, but because you're awake. You've trained your mind to ask, what's behind that smile? What's the motive under those words? What's not being said here? And in asking, you protect yourself, you guide your choices, you avoid traps that others walk straight into. You don't do this because you're cold. You do it because you've seen what happens when you don't. And now you live differently. You listen deeper, you speak less, and you see everything. 3. Your curiosity isn't just cute. It's strategic. Some people scroll through life passively, just taking things as they are, rarely stopping to ask why. Why does this work? Why does that fail? Why did that person say what they said? And why did it bother me more than it should have, but not you? You don't just accept what's given, you take it apart, you question everything, you look under the hood. You watch a video, and you're not just entertained, you're studying the pacing, the hook, the editing choices. You hear a compliment and you don't just smile. You ask what prompted it, what's behind it, where it's going. That kind of mind doesn't rest, it digs it, dissects, and it turns curiosity into clarity. This isn't about being clever. This is about being intentional. You're not curious for fun. You're curious because you want to understand, you want to know the rules of the game, not so you can follow them blindly, but so you can break them wisely. You study patterns. You reverse engineer success. You look at outcomes and trace them back to their origin. Not because you want to copy others, but because you want to build your own system that works even better. And that's rare. Carl Jung once said, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart." Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes, but you do both. You observe the outside world obsessively, its rhythms, its loopholes, its incentives, and then you filter it through your own internal compass. That's how you stay ahead without losing yourself. People often mistake your intensity for being over-analytical. But what they don't understand is that your curiosity isn't chaotic. It's strategic. You don't ask random questions. You ask the right ones. Questions that open doors, questions that expose weak spots, questions that lead to leverage. You want to know how influence works, how attention moves, how systems fail. Not just because it's interesting, but because it tells you where to aim your energy. It tells you what to avoid. It tells you what to build next, and while others chase shortcuts, you're busy studying the entire map, because you know the fastest route isn't always the safest one. Seneca wrote, "If a man knows not to which port he sails, no wind is favorable." That's the difference between shallow curiosity and yours. You're not just drifting through ideas, you're navigating toward mastery. Your curiosity gives you direction. It teaches you how to see. Most people live on autopilot. They consume, they react, they forget, but not you. You're documenting in your head, you're making mental models, testing scenarios, adjusting your thinking in real time. You don't read for entertainment, you read for strategy. You're not watching to kill time, you're watching to decode something, and because of that, you're always learning. Even when no one notices, and this kind of mind can be exhausting, can't it? Sometimes you wish you could shut it off to just enjoy something without needing to analyze it, but it's not in your wiring. You've trained your brain to be alive, and the reward: you see things others miss, you catch opportunities before they become trends. You understand people before they understand themselves. You spot problems before they explode. That's not luck. That's the payoff of a mind that refuses to stay still. Epictetus reminded us only the educated are free. And what he meant wasn't just about schools or degrees. He meant that true education, real self-education, frees you from dependency. When you're curious relentlessly and intentionally, you no longer wait for someone else to give you the answers. You go find them. You build your own frameworks, you create your own advantages. You become your own teacher. That's real freedom. And it's what separates the observer from the player and the player from the architect. You also understand something deeper. Everything connects. What seems random today might be the missing puzzle piece tomorrow. That's why you pay attention to things others overlook: a strange comment, a failed project, an old idea that suddenly makes sense in a new context. You collect it all, and then one day it clicks. The questions you asked 2 years ago, they fuel the answers. You're living now. That's how you move, like a strategist, like someone who's not here to just survive but to reshape the space they walk through. Marcus Aurelius said, "Look well into thyself. There is a source of strength which will always spring up if thou wilt always look." And that's what your curiosity gives you: inner strength, because while most people wait to be taught, you teach yourself. You don't need permission to grow. You don't need a roadmap. You ask questions until the path reveals itself. You don't stop when things get confusing. You dig deeper, and that makes your mind sharp, adaptive, and hard to replicate. You're also not easily fooled by surface-level trends. You ask who benefits. While they're reacting to results, you're tracing back the design. And while they wait for answers, you've already moved to the next question. That's what makes your curiosity a weapon, not a distraction. You're not just curious, you're calibrated, focused, awake. And the world doesn't quite know what to do with someone like that. Someone who refuses to accept anything at face value. Someone who always wants to know more, and then use that knowledge to move differently. That's the kind of mind that bends reality not by force but by understanding, and that's exactly who you are. You're never bored. Your mind is a playground. Have you ever just sat quietly in a room with nothing but your thoughts and felt perfectly fine? Not anxious, not fidgety, not desperate to fill the silence with noise or distraction, but calm, present, and even energized by it. If you have, you already know how rare that is. Most people panic in stillness. They reach for their phones, scroll endlessly, or jump from one stimulation to the next. But you're different. Your mind doesn't need to be entertained by the outside world because it's already alive on the inside. You can sit still and create entire experiences in your imagination. You can reflect, visualize, replay, and analyze without ever leaving your chair. And that's not just some quirky trait. It's a form of quiet brilliance. Your ability to be alone with your thoughts is a kind of mental strength most people never develop, and it's not because you were born this way. It's because you trained it slowly over time. You stopped needing constant input. You realized that your mind, when left uninterrupted, could offer more creativity, more insight, and more clarity than any app or video ever could. Carl Jung once said, "Solitude is for me a fountain of healing which makes my life worth living." That hits different when you've actually felt it. You don't fear being alone, you welcome it. Because in solitude your thoughts expand instead of shrinking. They sharpen, they connect, and they start to shape the person you're becoming. This doesn't mean you're constantly daydreaming or lost in thought. What it means is that your mind has stamina. You can focus on a single idea for a long stretch of time. You can break it apart, look at it from different angles, and reconstruct it with more precision. That kind of mental endurance isn't common. Most people burn out just trying to think deeply for more than 5 minutes, but you thrive in that space. You find energy in the stillness because it gives your mind the room to play, to explore, to solve, to imagine, and to grow. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." And that's where you go. When the world gets loud, you retreat inward. Not to escape, but to recalibrate. You ask yourself real questions. You go over conversations and see where things could have gone differently. You sketch out new plans. You build new visions. You don't need to escape into entertainment to feel alive. You simply go deeper into your own awareness. And in doing so, you become a little more composed, a little more self-reliant, a little more. You people often say boredom is the enemy, but boredom is only a threat to those who haven't built a life inside their own mind. When you have no internal world, you're forced to constantly escape into the external one. That's why people binge content they don't even enjoy. That's why they open apps before they even know why it's not about pleasure. It's about avoiding stillness, but you've turned stillness into a superpower. You've realized that if your mind is strong enough to entertain itself, then you're free from the grip of endless distractions. Seneca wrote, "The mind that is anxious about future events is miserable." But what about the mind that stays present? The mind that stays rooted in the now, calmly working through its ideas without rushing towards some external stimulus. That mind isn't just peaceful. It's dangerous because it can't be manipulated by urgency or noise. It thinks clearly, it makes better decisions, it sees through pressure tactics, and it resists the pull of impulsive distraction. That's what you've built, a mind that not only thinks but stays thinking when others tune out. And maybe you didn't always have this. Maybe there was a time when silence felt uncomfortable, like something was missing, but over time you began to understand that it wasn't silence that was uncomfortable. It was the lack of control over your own thoughts. And so you started the work. You began noticing patterns, training your focus, allowing your imagination to stretch you, turned reflection into a habit. And now you don't just pass the time, you shape it. While others wait for something interesting to happen, you create something interesting within yourself. Aristotle said, "The energy of the mind is the essence of life that rings true in every way. When your mind is alive, everything changes. You see more, you feel more, you connect more dots. You don't rely on the world to keep you stimulated. You become the source of your own engagement. That's freedom, not the kind that's flashy or loud, but the kind that builds real confidence, quiet confidence, the kind that comes from knowing that even in complete stillness, you are never empty, you are always enough. And that kind of presence is rare today. We live in a world built to scatter our attention every second. There's a new notification, a new alert, a new, "You should look at this," but the fact that you can resist all of that and sit with your thoughts, that's not just powerful, that's revolutionary. It means you're not controlled by the system. You're observing it. It means you're not reactive, you're intentional. It means you're not lost in distraction. You're present with purpose. So the next time someone wonders how you stay so calm, so composed, so steady, it's because you've made your mind your home, and homes like that don't crumble under pressure. They don't need noise to feel alive. They don't need chaos to feel relevant. They grow stronger in silence. They sharpen in solitude. And they evolve not through external validation, but through internal transformation. You're not just someone who can handle boredom. You're someone who rarely even feels it, because your mind is always working, always exploring, always deepening. And that's not just a personality trait, that's a sign of mastery and motion. Keep nurturing that, because in a world that's constantly trying to pull your focus outward, your ability to turn inward is your greatest source of power. 5. You don't brag, you just move in. Silence. Some people walk into a room and immediately try to take it over. They talk louder. They name drop. They repeat facts they half remember from books, just to look impressive. But then there's you. You sit back. You let others speak. You let them fill the space with noise, and while they're busy trying to be seen, you're seeing everything. It's not that you don't have something to say. It's that you've learned to say it when it matters. That kind of control doesn't come from insecurity or fear. It comes from power. A quiet kind, a disciplined kind. You've figured out that proving your intelligence is one of the fastest ways to lose your power. Once you try to convince people you're smart, you've already given them too much. You've handed over your energy. You've made your value dependent on their recognition. That's not your game. You don't want to be known. You want to be effective, and the most effective people, they don't broadcast their every move. They just make moves and let the results do the talking. Seneca once wrote, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more that is poor." And craving recognition is one of the most subtle forms of poverty. When you need others to validate you, you become a prisoner to their opinion, but you've trained yourself to let go of that. You've stopped needing to impress. You've stopped correcting people just to feel smarter. You've stopped chasing applause, and in that silence, you've become more powerful than you ever were when you were trying to be seen. You don't correct people mid-sentence to show what you know. You don't flaunt your resume or your achievements. You don't post every win. You let people think you're simple until they realize too late that you've already moved ahead of them. That's not deception. That's strategy you've accepted, that being underestimated is a gift. Carl Jung said, "The most dangerous things are not those that shout, but those that whisper." And that's exactly how you operate. Low volume, high impact. You've outgrown the need to shine in every room. You've realized that not every room deserves to see your light. There's strength in restraint, there's wisdom in holding back, and the truth is, those who talk the most often act the least. Those who need constant attention are usually running from something inside. But you've made peace with yourself. You don't explain your vision, you don't defend your silence, you don't chase people's understanding. Because you've learned that silence can't be misquoted, and strategy works better when no one sees it coming. And the thing is, this kind of mindset doesn't happen overnight. Maybe you used to speak up more. Maybe you used to need that validation, but life taught you mistakes, taught you being overexposed, taught you. And now you choose quiet. You choose focus. You choose depth over display. While others are busy updating everyone about their progress, you're making actual progress. You let the noise pass you. Let the trends fade, because you're building something that doesn't need to trend. It needs to last. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. That's how you live. You don't argue about your value. You live it. You don't try to prove your mind. You let your life reflect it." That means choosing actions over announcements. It means moving in silence, not because you're afraid, but because you're focused. It means understanding that power isn't loud. It's intentional. Your calmness is not indifference. It's calculation. Your quietness is not weakness, it's control. You're not passive, you're precise. And while others confuse noise with relevance, you stay grounded. You understand something they don't, that if everyone sees your next move, it can be blocked. But if no one sees it coming, it can't be stopped. That's why you protect your plans. That's why you move in silence, not to hide, but to win. You've also noticed something else. The loudest people are rarely the most capable. They need noise to distract from the lack of substance. You've built your substance in solitude, in thought, in discipline. You've spent your time refining your craft instead of broadcasting your intentions. You've created a system that doesn't rely on praise, it runs on purpose. Aristotle said, "Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom." And when you really know yourself, you no longer beg others to understand you. You let them misunderstand you, let them think small. You let them assume, because you know the truth doesn't need defending. And in the end, the same people who underestimated, you will wish they had paid more attention, but by then you'll be too far ahead for them to catch up. So no, you don't brag. You don't flex. You don't shout your plans from the rooftops. You move in silence. Not because you're hiding, because you're focused, not because you're timid, because you're powerful. And the people who really get it, they feel your presence even when you don't say a word. Because intelligence doesn't have to announce itself, it just moves quietly, sharply, unstoppable. 6. You make people think. It was their idea. There's a certain kind of intelligence that never needs to shout. It doesn't interrupt, it doesn't dominate conversations. It doesn't insist on being right. Instead, it listens carefully, speaks sparingly, and nudges people gently in the direction of truth without ever making them feel like they've lost control. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Because you do it. You've realized that telling people what to do or why they're wrong rarely changes anything. If anything, it just hardens their resistance, but guiding someone to discover the truth on their own, that changes everything. That's not manipulation. It's a higher form of communication. It's subtle, powerful, and almost invisible to the Untrained eye, most people are addicted to being right. They argue to win, they correct others mid-sentence just to prove a point. But you've grown past that. You've seen how ego gets in the way of progress. You've seen how most people will defend a bad idea simply because they don't want to be told they're wrong. And so you take a different route. You ask better questions instead of debating. You plant seeds. You lead the conversation in a way that gives the other person space to think to. Really think and come to their own conclusion, Carl Jung once said. Thinking is difficult. That's why most people judge you've chosen the harder path. You make people think. And because of that, your influence doesn't come from pressure. It comes from precision when you guide someone without force. When you leave just enough silence for them to hear their own thoughts, they begin to believe that the insight they arrive at was theirs, and that's the beauty of what you do. You don't need the credit. You just care about the impact. You don't care if your name is attached to the solution. You care that the solution works. That's what sets you apart. You've probably experienced this in conversations with friends, colleagues, or even strangers. Someone struggling with a decision stuck in a loop. Instead of telling them what you think they should do, you ask them how they feel about it. You ask them what they've tried already. You ask what they're really afraid of. You don't give them your conclusion. You help them reach their own, and then later they come back to you grateful, thinking they figured it out by themselves. You just smile, knowing you played your part from the shadows. That's not manipulation. That's wisdom. That's maturity. That's Stoic strategy. This kind of influence isn't just social, it's deeply psychological. You understand the architecture of how people think. You know that identity shapes behavior, that people are more likely to change when they believe the change aligns with who they are, not just what they were told. So you frame things differently. You don't challenge their identity. You speak in ways that reinforce their self-image, gently expanding their view instead of shattering it. That's an art. And very few people do it well. Seneca once said, "He who is brave is free." And part of being brave is letting go of your need to control the spotlight. You're free from the addiction to validation. You don't mind being the ghostwriter behind someone else's moment of clarity. You've realized that true influence doesn't need to be loud. In fact, the quieter it is, the more effective it becomes. Because when people believe the insight is their own, they don't fight it. They embrace it. And let's be honest, it took time to learn this. Maybe there was a version of you that used to correct everyone, jump into debates, or try to force your ideas on people. But over time, you saw how that backfired. You saw how pride closes more doors than it opens. So you evolved. You learned to step back. You stopped needing to be the loudest in the room. Now you let people talk and you listen for what's not being said. You don't rush in. You wait for the right moment, and when you speak, it's not to win. It's to shift the conversation. Plato once said, "Wise men speak because they have something to say. Fools because they have to say something that hits differently when you've lived it." You know that the person who speaks least often speaks last, and with the most weight, your words land harder, because they come from a place of reflection, not reaction. And the best part, you don't have to push. You don't have to fight. You let people come to you on their own timeline, because you trust your influence. You know, it's not about control. It's about clarity, and clarity doesn't always need your voice. Sometimes it just needs your presence. You've learned that ideas planted with grace take root more deeply than those thrown with force. You're not the hammer. You're the spark, the gentle, nudge, the invisible guide, and that in today's world of endless noise is one of the most valuable skills you can have. So while others try to dominate the conversation, remember your strength isn't in overpowering, it's in understanding, and your power, it lies in your ability to shift minds without raising your voice. 7. You don't react, you wait. Watch and strike. There's a difference between feeling something and being controlled by it. Most people blur that line. They feel slighted and they lash out. Someone disagrees with them and they argue just to protect their ego. One minor insult, one misstep, and suddenly it's a full-blown emotional outburst, but not you. You've learned how to hold your fire. You've learned how to feel everything without needing to show everything. That doesn't mean you're cold. It means you're composed. You've separated reaction from response. And in doing so, you've reclaimed a kind of inner power that few people ever experience. It's not that you don't feel disrespected when someone crosses a line. You feel it, but you don't give them the satisfaction of a visible response. You don't start explaining yourself or defending your worth, you just go quiet. Not in submission, but in strategy. Carl Jung once said, "Even a happy life cannot be without a measure of darkness." You've accepted that darkness, that sting of offense, the ache of being underestimated, but you let it sharpen you, not shake you. That's what makes your presence unsettling, because people can't read you. They can't predict how you'll react. They can't use your emotions against you because you don't hand them over. You've learned that reactivity is a form of weakness. When you react immediately, you're not in control. The situation is, the other person is, and that's not how you operate. You've developed something stronger than a quick comeback. You've developed patience, not passive patience, but calculated delay. You let people show their true colors without interrupting them. You give them space to overplay their hand, and when the time comes to respond, your words don't just land, they cut. Seneca wrote, "A sword never kills anybody, it is a tool in the killer's hand." That's how your mind works. Your silence is the sheath, your thoughts are the sharpening stone, and when you move, it's never out of emotion, it's out of precision. This kind of control is rare in a world where everyone is taught to speak their mind in every moment. Restraint is often misunderstood. People think you're avoiding conflict, but you're not. You're just choosing the right moment to engage. When you've observed, when you've planned, when the outcome is already leaning in your favor. You've stopped arguing just to be right. You've stopped trying to win emotional battles because you know that real victory happens in silence. In the part where people realize you weren't ignoring them, you were simply letting them show you who they really are. Aristotle once said, "Anybody can become angry, that is easy. But to be angry with the right person at the right time and in the right way, that is not easy." That's the path you've chosen. You're not emotionless, you're emotionally trained. You've chosen not to react because you understand that every reaction is a transaction. It costs you energy, time, peace, and you don't spend that carelessly anymore. When someone tries to provoke, you stay still, let them talk, let them assume, let them think they've won. Because while they're celebrating early, you're studying. You're making mental notes. And when the timing is right, when you decide, it's your move that ends the game. There's something stoic in how you handle pressure. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. That principle lives in you. You no longer hand over your peace because of someone else's bad mood. You don't flinch just because someone wants to test you. You've become the kind of person who can absorb tension without letting it leak into your behavior. And that makes you someone people don't quite know how to handle. They expect to fight, they want to provoke emotion, but instead you give them calm, stillness, silence. And that silence does more damage than yelling ever could, because in silence people are forced to sit with themselves, with their choices, with their words, and often that discomfort reveals more than any argument would. Epictetus said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." And you've taken that to heart. You've faced things, maybe betrayal, maybe disrespect, maybe straight up injustice. And you've chosen not to let them define you. You didn't explode, you didn't collapse, you simply adapted, you adjusted, you watched, and then you moved on your own terms. And when you moved, you didn't miss. That's what separates you. You play the long game, you know when to act and when to wait. You understand that not every battle is worth fighting and not every opinion deserves a response. You're not passive, you're selective. You don't waste energy, you conserve it. And because of that, when you do decide to speak, to act, to confront it, it's hard because it's rare, because it's measured, because it's real. Most people never develop this level of control. They live on edge, one wrong word and they explode, one inconvenience and they spiral. But you've built something different. You've created emotional distance between what happens and how you respond. You've trained your mind to pause, to reflect, to act from a place of strength, not survival. And that's not just emotional maturity, it's power. So yes, you wait, you watch. You let others exhaust themselves while you remain still. And then when the dust settles and the noise fades, you step forward quietly, sharply, decisively. That's not revenge, that's discipline, that's self-mastery, that's what makes your presence unforgettable. Not because you speak often, but because when you do, it means something. You've chosen a path that's harder but higher. You've chosen to stay composed when it would be easier to react. You've chosen to hold your power rather than waste it. And in that choice, you've become someone who doesn't just survive pressure. You shape it. You mold it into growth, into clarity, into timing. That's the mark of someone who doesn't live at the mercy of the world, but someone who has learned how to move through it with grace, with strength, and with surgical precision. Stoic, strategic, unshakable in a world that moves fast and reacts faster. Your calm is not weakness, it's wisdom. Your silence, your patience, your depth, that's your edge, never forget. It's not the loudest voice that leaves the deepest impact, it's the one that speaks only when it must. If this spoke to something inside you, there's more waiting. Watch one of the videos on your screen now and keep sharpening the quiet power you carry. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being a part of the Stoic Tide.